hour right here on France 24. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. This is the France 24 debate. We're looking on the day where Angela Merkel made her first trip to Athens in 5 years at Greece and the situation there, and also more widely, the Eurozone, austerity. Is it just deepening the woe for countries like Greece and Spain? We'll talk about Spain in a moment. With us, Kostas Lapavitsas of the School of Oriental and African Studies in London. His latest book is Crisis in the Eurozone. Jean-Paul Betbez of French bank Crédit Agricole, France 24 business editor Marcus Carlson, and from the International Herald Tribune, Anne Baghamary. Little comment for you on Facebook. Andrew from Otley, when we said what medicine would be best for Greece, wrote the following. He said, the only way out is 100-year bonds where you consolidate your loans into 1,200 difficult monthly payments. A little bit of facetiousness there on the part of Andrew. But you get the sense, Anne Baghamary, that throughout this crisis, people are really having a hard time thinking outside the box. The recipe for bundling up Greece's debt, it's been part using old recipes and part a bit of improvisation along the way.
Well, that's absolutely true. And one problem, well, there are a number of problems with the whole situation. One is the huge size of the debt. The second is what my colleague panel mentioned as the transformation of private debt into essentially institutional debt. Those institutions, including the European Central Bank, have some very strict rules as to what they're allowed to do with that debt. You saw Mr. Asmussen, the German member of the ECB board, saying we can't reduce the interest rate and we can't stretch out the payments. And so essentially, all you're really left with is a country that simply cannot pay its debts. The only thing left to do is, and it's an interesting thing because there have been studies showing that the Greek budget, after all of the cuts, actually would be balanced if it weren't for the debt payments. So all of the bailout money is now essentially going to pay debt. Now, an easy solution, just on paper, would be simply to write off the debt, take one more haircut. It was painful last time, it'll be painful this time, but it's done. And then maybe you can think in more creative ways about injecting some growth into that Greek economy. You don't have it simply staying at status quo austerity. That's never going to get them out of their problem. How do you do that, though? How do you do it when you can't even really chip away effectively at the debt mountain? It's a huge dilemma. I think creative thinking would be great, but I think you also have to look at the structures you're working within. You have to look at the rocks and the hard places and figure out where there's any room for movement.
Jean-Paul Betbez, at the same time, all the French banks, including Crédit Agricole, winding down their relationships with banks in Greece, trying to rid themselves of their assets there.
Not to leave, and basically there were two foreign banks, which were French banks, Société Générale and Crédit Agricole, and Poriki and Geniki, and those two banks are in the process of being sold to Greek banks, okay, and that's it. So we leave the country. Of course, it will be really expensive for us. It will be a very painful experiment for us. But we did not find any way to do any kind of profitable job. So that's it. And we tried and we improved, but that's it. Our colleague on the panel was speaking about the economy and something like that. Really, this is a problem because you have entrepreneurs in the country, you have companies in this country, and the situation is so bad that even the good entrepreneurs and the good companies cannot survive, and this is extremely problematic. This is why it is very necessary to help this country to survive. It will be very, very long, but it is not possible in this country to kill the companies and to kill the people and to kill the entrepreneurs. And now the pressure is very, very important.
So should Greece stay in the Eurozone as a result?
Of course it will.
But should it?
Of course it should. But the question is, and it is a very strong story, it has to be held for years and years and years, and this is it. Because when you are in, you can hardly be expelled, okay? Because where are you going? And this is it. So what kind of solution do you have, which would be a sustainable solution for you? Because you must have companies surviving, you must have a state working, which and the state is not to my understanding, working. So my understanding is that we have to go on with Greeks living for years and years and years in the process. And of course, at the end of the process, which is very long, we will have a new Greece.
Kostas Lapavitsas, do you agree?
I'm not sure that people realize what they're actually telling the Greek people when they come up with this kind of thing. This is actually saying that a generation and more of Greeks should put up with basically no growth, austerity, no prospects, poverty, and so on. For what? To stay in the Eurozone, to stay within a set of rules that has been devised, which hasn't benefited the country. I mean, you've got to see how it appears to people on the ground in Greece. Now, when we look at the situation more calmly and coolly, what we realize immediately is that Greece will need cancellation of the debt. There's no question at all about it. And this cancellation of the debt will not be beneficial to Greece or to the benefit of Greece unless Greece takes the initiative. This is the truth of it. Greece must take the initiative and must demand and impose certain terms that will be beneficial to its own domestic economy. Because the cancellation of debt that's taken place so far has not benefited Greece. It's actually hit the Greek economy very badly. It hit its banks, it hit its pension funds and so on. So Greece needs debt cancellation and it needs to take the initiative in effecting it. Now, if it does that, immediately membership of the euro and everything it means will come on the table. Not two ways about it. And then it will have to be confronted seriously, and not just for Greece, but for other countries as well, which are in similar position to Greece, Portugal, Spain, and so on. Because in truth, this crisis hasn't emanated from the Greek state, which is bad enough and it needs reform. It has emanated from the structures of the euro. That's really what the problem is. The separation of the euro into core and peripheral countries, the emergence of surpluses and deficits, structural surpluses and deficits within the monetary union, and the imposition of austerity on countries that have got the deficits in order presumably to deal with the problem. This doesn't deal with the problem. It perpetuates it, it firms it up, and something else is needed across Europe. Now, this something else, I'm afraid, will have to be very radical and very outside the box if it is going to work. Something like a Marshall Plan, something like a change of policy, of economic policy in Germany, something like wholesale transformation of the banking system, something like debt cancellation across the board. Otherwise, the mechanisms of the euro will simply not work. Otherwise, we're going to have a breakup of one form or another in the coming years.
Marcus Carlson, who is the culprit? Is it the Greeks for running a deficit, or is it the Germans for perpetrating a surplus?
Look, I think at this stage, I mean, we have to remember, Greece ran up these kind of debts in the first place. I mean, there's no getting away from it.
Everybody knew when they entered the Eurozone that they would run a deficit. Okay.
Everyone knew, or everyone suspected at least, that perhaps they were cooking the books, so to speak.
It was put on the table in 2005 at a summit in Brussels, and they decided to close the book and forget that for now.
Absolutely, but I just want to sort of come back to what we're talking about here. When we talk about we have to think creatively. We have to think outside the box. What that means is debt cancellation. That means drawing a line over Greece's debts. That is going to go down like a lead balloon in Nordic capitals, in Berlin, in Amsterdam, for instance. Because where's the moral hazard? The whole point of this seems to be, at least from a German perspective, is to push Greek politicians towards making the reforms that Greece arguably needs.
And never forget that the entities that now are heavily hold a lot of Greek debt are themselves troubled Eurozone nations like France. Nobody likes to say France is troubled, but we've got problems coming down the pipe.
It is.
Yeah.
You know, the story is, it is too easy to say that austerity is, there are responsibilities within Greek people. You know, when they said, for example, oh, sorry, the deficit is not 3%, it is 13%, it was a typo. This is not serious, okay? And afterwards, you do not have a state which is working. And it is very important that this state
But were you genuinely surprised when they said that?
We were. Concerning the extent of the difference, I would say, between 3% of budget deficit and 13% of budget deficit, it's a big difference, okay? And second, we were surprised, and I still am surprised by the fact that the tax collection is still not working. and has been 2 years of help by countries. The judiciary system is not working. And when you see, for example, these are people who take the money out of the country, and this is a list of the people, please do, and 2 years after, they did not do anything. Okay, and this has nothing to do with Germany or something like that. This is 100% Greek. Okay, they have the list, and they don't do anything with this, and it is very important because there is plutocracy, as to use a Greek word, and this is a big story.
All right, it's a question. It's the story that was on the front page of your newspaper. Kind of a morbid tale. That list of 2,000 Greeks who stashed their cash in Switzerland. It's now led to the apparent suicide of a former Deputy Interior Minister, Anne Bagamary. It's not.
It is that is in itself a tragedy, and another story running in the background is the fact that the governing coalition. This is almost a Keystone Cop story. It'd be funny if it weren't tragic. Who's got the memory stick? Who's got the list, the electronic list of all these 2,000 people? The members of the coalition that is already fragile, but tries to hold it together in order to negotiate with the Troika and get Greece out of its debt problems. The members of this coalition government, the socialists and their coalition partners, are tearing each other apart behind the scenes over this memory stick. It's an excuse to let all of the political aggravation and all of the resentment at everything that Greece is going through come to the fore. Accusations of corruption, which undoubtedly there is. If what this ends up doing is tearing apart the coalition government, we're going to have no choice but to think about Greece in a different way. And I was going to say that maybe one way to think about Greece, and this comes in the context of the IMF and the World Bank meeting in Tokyo, the IMF is often thought now as the only honest broker at the table. It's the only institution that has the credibility and the financial muscle to actually look Greece in the eye and say, get your act together. The ECB has its own restraints. The European Commission wants to keep Greece in. They're a little bit conflicted. The World Bank might also be able to bring some interesting things to bear. If you start talking about a government that doesn't work, heavy debt that needs to be forgiven, possibility of a rogue state, police actions, you're talking about Africa.
Kostas Labavitsas, you mentioned in part one how the political window is short in Greece because the ruling coalition is losing credibility fast. Whose names are on this memory stick? Do we have any ideas?
We don't, but it will be powerful business people, powerful politicians. It will be basically a good proportion of the elite that has been doing much of the running of the country for the last several decades. And incidentally, it will be the same elite that has got a vested interest in the current program effected by the Troika. I wish to stress this very, very powerfully, because you see, the notion that what's been happening in Greece the last 3 years is actually change of the state, reform of the state, a renovation of the state, is not true. What's emerging in Greece is not at all a new state that does all these wonderful things and is incorruptible and so on. What's emerging is a weak state. Greek state used to function. It's not true that the Greek state was collapsing and so on. It used to function. What's emerging is a weak state. It can't even maintain its armed forces properly now. And this state is actually being substituted left, right, and center by parastatal mechanisms, often very unsavory mechanisms, which are providing services and everything else to ordinary people, and which are beginning to operate like a mafia.
You're talking about Golden Dawn.
Golden Dawn is just a political dimension of this, but it doesn't have to be just Golden Dawn. Mm-hmm. We're talking about replacement of ill-functioning or non-functioning state mechanisms with other mechanisms that provide protection, that facilitate this, that, and the other, which are basically mafia-type mechanisms. And this is a well-known procedure. This is actually what's happening in Greece now because of the stabilization program, not for any intrinsic weakness, because of an intrinsic weakness of the Greeks themselves. That's what's emerging. So what we're going to get is no growth, poverty, and a badly functioning state that will probably veer towards undemocratic mechanisms.
And to Anne Bagamary's point that perhaps the IMF can help clear the air?
The IMF will not be around the Greek program for much longer, I think, because they know that the program doesn't work. They know that the debt is unsustainable, and their own internal regulations prevent them from becoming involved in a program that they know is unsustainable. Secondly, the IMF is becoming increasingly exposed to Greece. It currently has lent to Greece around about 20 billion euros, and if this program continues, it will be exposed to the tune of perhaps 45 billion euros. Now, come cancellation time, which is pretty much inevitable, Greece will probably face the prospect of defaulting on payments to the IMF, significant payments to the IMF. Now, this will be the first time something like that will have happened in the post-war period, and it will be a bomb in the foundations of the international financial system, as you will realize, because you don't default on the IMF. The credibility of the IMF will be torn to shreds. The fund, therefore, is under pressure to withdraw from the Greek program as fast as possible, and probably simply to offer advisory facilities and so on. I think that's what's going to happen in the coming period. That's going to be the reality. I don't think the fund will be the institution that will continue to run the Greek program or be an important player in this.
Now, let me be clear. I wasn't suggesting the IMF lend Greece any more money. I was suggesting it's the one institution that can actually play the role of saying, okay, right, you really, here are the things you absolutely have to do. It was more of an advisory capacity, but a very tough one that I was envisioning.
Just a final point, because we're almost out of time. It's cold comfort for the Greeks. Anti-austerity demonstrations this week across Spain again. The country works out the conditions under which it will probably ask for a bailout of its banks. In part one of our discussion, Jean-Paul Betbez, you were talking about the worry of contagion.
Of course.
At this point in time, how much does the situation in Spain depend on the situation in Greece?
There is a question of course, it's let us say it's different because there is a solidity in the Spanish situation, in the economy, which is not exactly the same, of course, by far. But there are many tensions and many specificities in Spain. First, you have a bubble. Burbuja in Spanish. Second, you have, of course, the crisis.
So it's a different situation.
And it is more complex because you have regions, and so there are, the risk as Spain is concerned is that the country could fall apart because there would be tension between the Basque country and the Catalans.
Right, so that's a different.
It's
a different kettle of fish.
For me, it's worse. For me, it's worse. But it is a risk of not a collapse, but a growing tension within the country.
Within the country itself.
We do not have this.
Unfortunately, that's where we're going to have to leave it. Jean-Paul Betbez, I want to thank you. I want to thank Anne Bagger, Marcus Carlson, and I want to thank Kostas Lapavitsas for joining us from London. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.